We're back again, and this time we're going to look at a very different set of woodlots. These are also on campus, but they are on the opposite end of campus from the dairy bush that we saw last time. Behind us here is the Arboretum, which is a fantastic place to go and explore forest biodiversity. They've got lots of different tree species with labels and taxonomic IDs and the rest. There's also some really interesting microhabitats in there that we'll talk about. And in addition, there's a segment of the Arboretum that's mostly reserved for research purposes that has been protected and was not cut when Guelph was settled. So we actually have a newer sort of environment here, but still different from the dairy bush, and an older woodlot, which ties in very well with what we're talking about in our inquiry case. So here we are. We've walked across the open areas near the soccer fields, and we're just at the entrance to one of the most popular parts of the Arboretum, which is the boardwalk that runs through this patch of woods here. And we're just going to walk through there and take a look at that particular area because it's of special interest for a number of different reasons, especially because of the seasonal changes that take place in there, which are relatively unique among the woodlots that we're looking at during this inquiry case. So we'll walk in there and take a look, and then we'll carry on into the Arboretum.
When you come here, is one thing to take note of. Maybe different trees here from when you're in the dairy bush. So look at this. This is a black locust. It's growing on the edge of the forest, and the conditions here are much different. There's a lot more light. The species need to be able to tolerate that full amount of light. As you look over to my right, there's poplar trees and there's a willow tree. Again, these trees are adapted to have a lot of light, and they can outcompete other species.
So we're just walking down through that path that we showed you onto the boardwalk here. Some of this is more recent. The plastic boards are a little bit more recent, but there's been a boardwalk in here for quite a long time. Students like to come in here, go jogging, and it's just a good access point into the rest of the parts of the Arboretum that are usually of interest. So you'll notice that this boardwalk is actually quite elevated in this area, and there's a good reason for that, which is that this whole area in the spring, when the snows melt, floods up to and sometimes a little bit over the height of this boardwalk. Now that doesn't happen in the dairy bush or in other areas that we might look at today, but in here it floods quite significantly. In fact, you can see how the boardwalk is all distorted and bent. Well, it generally is almost floating during the wet time. There's actually a little display we're coming up to here that talks about some of this, which is right here off the boardwalk, and talks a bit about some of the invertebrates that you can find in here. You'll find some things that aren't so pleasant, like mosquito larvae in huge numbers, but you'll also find various interesting crustaceans like Daphnia, which is what you're looking at here, also some fairy shrimp, copepods, amphipods, and you'll also see things like water mites, different species of aquatic snails, and various other invertebrates that come out during the wet season, mature, and then basically complete much of their life cycle during that short period while this ephemeral pool is present. And then it becomes like what you see here, which is dry. So in the spring, come back out here and take a look at it. Right here, underneath this sign, is a bucket. It's chained to the boardwalk, which is here all year. Right now it's essentially useless. However, when the wet season comes, you can use it to scoop up different invertebrates, different things that are floating around in the water here, and see the kind of diversity that exists and how it changes over the seasons. So do come back in the spring and check out this part of the Arboretum.
Just off the boardwalk, you see all these trees. If you take a closer look at the leaves, you might look at that and say, hey, I'm getting pretty good at ID, that's a maple. It is a maple. It's different from the dairy bush maple, which is either black maple or sugar maple. If we turn this over and we look at a sinus, very sharp angle. This is a red maple. And the red maples have adapted to living in wet areas. They can live where their roots are submerged in water for long periods of time. And you'll see in southern Ontario, we have quite a few red maple swamps. Look at this tree. This is a conifer tree. This is eastern hemlock, Tsuga canadensis. If we take a closer look, it has flat needles, unlike spruce, which have square needles. Those needles you can roll in your finger, but these ones are flat. And if I turn it over, we can see on the bottom of each leaf, each needle, there are lines of stomata. These are the breathing pores. These are the pores where the plant will take in carbon dioxide and let out precious oxygen. If we look around the forest, we see that there are a few more hemlocks, and they're all in the subcanopy. They're not that big, and they're not that dominant. If we take a look up into the canopy, we see a lot of deciduous trees. And maybe you recognize these. These are our sugar maples. The sugar maple is a dominant canopy. It's interesting, when you look at this dominance and abundance pattern here in the forest, you can ask the question, how did this happen? And it's very likely that it's competitive interaction and competitive dominance. Maple trees have the big leaves, comes out in the spring, they're like solar panels. They produce a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of energy to let that little seedling grow very quickly and outcompete the conifer. Surface area here for photosynthetic capacity is quite low in this conifer tree. It doesn't have a lot of energy that it's producing in carbohydrates. It doesn't have a lot of quick growth. So the maple tree can grow really quickly for a short amount of time and outcompete these conifers. We're looking around in the Arboretum, we see a lot of different species. Why not look down on the ground? Here's another life form. It's a fern. This is a fern called the evergreen fern, or Dryopteris. And if you're out here in the winter time, and you should do this, you should come for a walk or maybe even a cross-country ski through the Arboretum and notice that there's ferns here. They have plant tissue and they're still green. The reason they can do this is in their cells there's propylene glycol. It's the same propylene glycol that you pour into your engine. It's antifreeze. If we turn the fern over and we take a look on the other side, we see all these round circles called sori. The sori have capsules arranged around the edges that have spores in them. And this plant reproduces by spores.